So this is, by my count, my 11th two-way of the week. Could have that wrong. Not great at math, but I think so. But if I seem the least bit tired to you, think again. I'm ready to roll, ready to do this. Thank you for joining Friday night in here in the East. Two-way tonight is what we call this program because it's on the two-way platform, and in the East it's on at night. But as I've said before, in Seattle we call it two-way in the afternoon. Thank you for joining. A little later in the program, couldn't be more delighted to be joined by Stephen Moore. Now, formally, he's an economist, but he's a singular figure. He's at the nexus of economics and politics and government, kind of a legendary figure. I couldn't be more excited to have him here. We'll talk about the Fed and the economy and all sorts of things. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you might want to ask a question. If you do, and you're here on the two-way platform, or raise your hand. If you're watching on X or on YouTube, don't raise your hand and don't put smack in the chat. Even on Friday night, as I say, especially on Friday night, please, peace, love, and understanding, presumption of grace for all should be your animating sensibilities. Now, here's the news. Epstein, we're leading with Epstein again, against my better judgment. We'll just tell the story through different elements. Number one, Sam, President told Pam Bondi, Pam, seek release of Epstein grand jury records. And the president also said today, he went on Truth Social quite a bit today. Number two, that he'll defer to the courts on Epstein, the president says. And of course, it's not typical. The president normally would say, the court should do what he wants. And he also previously said this was all up to Pam Bondi, but now he's saying it's up to Pam Bondi and the courts. Number three, something else the president said today as he throws spaghetti and maybe some penne against the wall. If there was a, quote, smoking gun on Epstein, why didn't the Dems, who controlled the files for 4 years and had Garland and Comey in charge, use it? Because they had nothing. This is a line that you hear from a lot of reporters. You hear it from a lot of Republicans that, well, there's no smoking gun because, again, as the president says in this post, you would have seen it. I'm just not sure that that's the case. It's logical, but I'm not sure it's necessarily true. So two legal developments today in the Epstein matter. First, Pam Bondi, and actually it was filed by the Deputy Attorney General, did go into court in Brooklyn, I believe, or Manhattan, New York, and asked for the grand jury material for the Epstein case and the Maxwell case to be released. I tried to get a bead on when the court was likely to rule before we started here. The filing was pretty late in the day. I don't know the answer to that. So maybe someone, a member of the community, can help us out with that. But I don't know how long that'll take to be adjudicated. And if they rule in favor of the Justice Department, how long it will take. I don't know if any parties will step in and say they don't want this stuff released. The other legal development occurred also late in the day. The president, as he said he would do last night, sued the Wall Street Journal. Number four, this took place in not in New York where the Journal is, but in Florida. Donald Trump sues Dow Jones, News Corp, Rupert Murdoch, Wall Street Journal reporters for libel, according to the court filing. Number five, the president said, quote, I look forward to getting Rupert Murdoch to testify in my lawsuit against him and his pile of garbage newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. That will be an interesting experience. It'll be interesting to see, as you know, Donald Trump's a highly litigious figure, but like most civil matters in America, most of his cases don't end up in court and they end far short of discovery. Be interesting if this case goes to discovery. I'd like to see the discovery on both sides. And I continue to say the sourcing in the Journal story is just a little weird. Did the government official show them this document? If so, who and with what motive? We just don't know. But anyway, here is the docket entry, number 6, docket entry for the case, and too small for me to read, in all honesty, but it says that even then, still too small for me to read, but it says one of the defendants in this civil case is Keith Rupert Murdoch. First time I'm learning that Rupert Murdoch's first name is Keith. I probably should have known that, but I didn't. All right. One of the issues we've discussed it last night, or no, we discussed it this morning about whether the president is telling the truth when he says that this letter, this ostensible, purported letter in the Epstein 50th birthday book was actually written by the president, and whether he did the drawing. The president said in his initial denial that he doesn't draw. But of course he does. So number 7, the New York Times joins other news organizations in pointing out that the president has done many sketches. Often he'll do them and then auction them off, because a Trump drawing, even before he was president, would draw a decent amount for charity. And of course, if the president's a skinflint, a cheapskate, a miser, then he doesn't have to actually give off anything of actual value. He just dashes off the drawing. Now, what the president's spokesperson says in that New York Times story, denying, or when the Times is showing previous drawings, the spokesperson says, and again, this is I would say non-denial denial, but it's not what the president has said. The president said no drawings of any sort. The spokesman said he doesn't draw drawings like that, the sexual nature or whatever, however you want to create the difference. So don't know that any news organization has matched the journal's reporting. And I go back to saying, where did they get the story? We don't know. The main political development today is it's not quantitative, but qualitatively, MAGA's back. The band's back together. The reservation is complete. The people who have video shows, audio shows, who are supporters of the president, but whose constituency said, keep talking about Epstein, they're now rallying around the president in opposition to the Wall Street Journal story. Parallel universe where it's not Friday, right? These shows are typically Monday through Friday shows. They don't do shows on the weekend. And the weekend, of course, in a news story like this, can be a circuit breaker of sorts. Will people be talking about Epstein on Monday on these shows? Maybe, because you've got these 2 lawsuits now. The lawsuit against Dow Jones and Murdoch, but then the government's filing. But I can tell you, I heard from 2 different MAGA supporters of the president today, very prominent people, both of whom said, the Cold War hostilities with the White House are over, and they're back to working with them in concert to, amongst other things, denounce the Wall Street Journal. The one place where you continue to see unrest and disquiet is Congress, where a lot of Republicans in Congress are joining their Democratic colleagues and saying they do not want this to end. They want to hear from Maxwell. They want more documents released. Now, the circuit breaker on that is not just the weekend, but Congress is away. And members of Congress have a harder time driving the news when they're not in session. So it'll be interesting to see where we are on Monday on that matter. Again, my guess is some of you want to ask Epstein questions, but Steve Moore will be here soon. So hopefully some of you want to ask economic questions. I'll keep doing the news, but if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. And I'd love to get the Epstein questions out of the way before Steve gets here. So if you've got an Epstein question, I'd love for you to raise your hand now, and we'll take a break from the other news and let's plow through some of those. So if you got your hand up, I'm assuming you want to ask about Epstein. Please raise your hand if you'd like to engage a little bit on Jeffrey Epstein. Dustin, welcome. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind regarding what I like to call the Epstein matter.
Thank you, Mark. And by the way, your monologue yesterday on Next Up was fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, my question is kind of in regard to the monologue and Epstein. I'm curious why the media, well, not the media, but why the right wing has been so obsessed with this story. But now that there's actually documentation coming out about the Russia collusion hoax, it seems to be going completely under the radar. And even you personally, Mark, I know that you've held the media accountable for the cover-up of Joe Biden's, cognitive decline, but I haven't heard you talk a lot about the lack of coverage or, in-depth investigation into what was basically a 4-year obsession with something that was very likely created by the Obamas and the Clintons working together to take down, Trump in his first administration.
Well, I have talked about it over the years. I haven't talked about it as recently because it's not as recent. But It's incredible, and it's the same phenomenon in this respect. Outrageously biased coverage, and coverage clearly intended to help one side and hurt the other side, and then virtually no accountability for what they did. Washington Post media critic Eric Wemple did a really long series, I think it was, on Rachel Maddow and all of her coverage of this, and didn't write much about his own paper and what they did. So this is another area where there are tens of millions of you who feel the way you do, who say, how can, even if they're not super ardently for Trump, say, how can the press ask to be treated like a credible arbiter of the national conversation when they would do this? So for those of you who don't know what happened today, the head director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, number 10, please. This is something I'm sure the president's highly interested in. She, in her job, has been going through the records, and the Biden folks, the Obama folks, left behind a paper trail of what they did in the context of the 2016 campaign, where the premise was that the Russians colluded with Donald Trump to steal the election. I will say, I did quite a bit of reporting on this at the time and afterwards. It was a tough situation for Barack Obama because the intelligence community was getting legitimate and, as far as I'm concerned, undisputed indications that Russia was trying to interfere in the election to help Donald Trump. Not about collusion, but about the Russians feeling that way. And so it's a difficult decision. If you did this as like a case study at the Kennedy School of Government, you're the president of the United States, you're a Democrat, you're trying to help Hillary Clinton win the election, and your intelligence community, wearing not your political hat, but your governmental hat, says the Russians are trying to do this. Do you say it publicly? Do you try to warn people publicly that this is happening, knowing that if you say it, you could be accused of helping Hillary Clinton win the election because you're basically saying Russia's for this guy and not for her. Very difficult choice. And I interviewed a bunch of people who were involved in that. That's a clean choice. What's being alleged and the suspicion is that they tried to make it seem like it was not just Russia helping Trump, but Trump working with Russia. So put up number 10, please. I'm gonna have to make these bigger for my tired old eyes for me to see them. Obama administration manufactured intelligence to create 2016 Russian election interference narrative, documents show. So what Tulsi Gabbard is arguing is, you can replace this one, Sam, please, with number 11. What she's arguing is that the documents suggest not just that they were trying to be honored brokers here, but that they in fact made stuff up to make it look worse for Trump than it was. Gabbard threatens prosecution against Obama administration officials for treasonous conspiracy. Now, I've not waded into documents, so I don't want to weigh in on the accuracy of this, but she is making criminal referrals, and it's without a doubt, Dustin, as your question suggested, that this attempt was led to the Mueller investigation, and the President Trump feeling strongly. People, I think, I'd be good if people on the left had sympathy for this. It seems pretty self-evident that much of Donald Trump's presidency was consumed by having to deal with an independent counsel investigation that really, when it ended, people say, well, it showed Russia tried to help Trump. That's different than a collusion. So to your point about me, I have talked about this over the years a lot. Maybe I should reference it more when I talk about the Biden stuff, but as you know, it's my own special hobby horse to talk about the Biden cognitive decline. Dustin, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, we'll switch gears now and talk about the economy with our guest, and people hopefully will have more questions about that topic. Fewer questions, at least tonight, about Epstein. Steve Moore probably has a lot of views about Jeffrey Epstein, but that's not why he's here. Steve Moore, before you got here, thank you for joining. I said, in my experience, you're singular because you know everybody and you're a rigorous economist, but you also know a lot about politics and policy and the press and the long arc of history of the conservative movement and the Republican Party, from Bush to Romney to Trump, I left John McCain out because he wasn't, I would say, an expert on the economy. How about that for being speaking well of the dead? Anyway, thank you for joining, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a bunch of stuff about the economy, and I want to start speaking of Senator McCain by asking you: are the fundamentals of the American economy strong now, and if so, what would you point to make the case?
I think they are. I'm pretty bullish right now. I think look, first of all, United States has so dominated over the last 25 years. I've often cite that statistic that we have seven companies, the Magnificent Seven, in Amazon and Google and Microsoft and uh, all the amazing companies, NVIDIA, et cetera, that really led the way for the United States to dominate the internet age over the last 25 years. I think we're really well prepped to win the next generation of technology, which is robotics and artificial intelligence. And Trump just signed an executive order the other day, really hoping pave the way. We're going to need a lot of energy for that. So I like that. Look, Trump is a businessman. I know a lot of people don't always agree with his policies. I don't always agree with them. He's a pretty good deal maker. I think he understands how a business succeeds, how an economy can succeed. And just the other day, he got very paved the way for the Bitcoin and the revolution, which is fantastic, the cryptocurrencies. So he's looking ahead at how America can dominate, and we can do that with low taxes and less regulation, plentiful energy. Obviously, we have big hurdles. This, Mark. I mean, the debt and deficit, which both parties are really responsible for, is always a huge hurdle, and it's something that makes me very nervous when I look at that number go up and up and up every year. But I'm really bullish on America right now. I think we're prepped to have a really gilded age of leading in all the major new industries, whether it's biotech, robotics, AI, entertainment. We're dominant.
What year did you come to Washington, D.C.?
Sorry?
What year did you move to Washington, D.C.?
So 40 years ago, I came in late 1983 in the Reagan years. And look, I think Reagan was a great president. He really got us out of the stagflationary 1970s. If you look at the U.S., one of my favorite statistics, Mark, is about the time I came to Washington, which was mid '83. Do you want to take a guess at what the Dow Jones Industrial Average was back then?
$120.
1,000.
Yeah, I was going to say
Maybe
12. I was going to say
I think it
1,200.
hit a low point. It was at 1,000 around 1981, 82. Here we are, we got a Dow 45,000. I mean, think about that. The last 40 years, we've lived through the greatest period of wealth creation in the history of civilization. And just to put this in context, if the next 40 years is as good as the last 40 years, 40 years from now, we'll be talking about Dow 1 million. So we've seen a massive increase in wealth creation because of the innovativeness of the American people, the tech boom, all these things. And it's going to be, I mean, look, you're talking about a future of flying cars and, automated cars, and we don't need truck drivers. Everything's going to be automated. I just joined the board of a company, Mark, called Lightspeed. We build houses with robots. I mean, this stuff is coming really quickly. I think most Americans aren't quite prepared for how fast these technological changes are going to change the way we live our lives and work.
What jobs have you had in government?
That's a good question. Not many. I worked in 1993 and 94 for Dick Armey, who at that time was the sort of the beginning, as you recall, Mark, of the Republican Revolution when Newt Gingrich became Speaker. And I did that. I worked for a couple of commissions for Reagan. I was on Trump's for 6 months, his economic recovery task force after COVID. But I've mostly been in the private sector over those years with think tanks and private groups.
And from Reagan through today, which presidents have you known?
Sorry?
From President Reagan till now, which presidents have you people you knew?
Do I know personally, or did I know personally?
Met them, worked with
Well,
them.
I only met Ronald Reagan once or twice. I mean, and just shook his hand. I wouldn't say, I was a pipsqueak back then. I was 28-year-old pimple face snot. I knew George W. Bush pretty well. I think George W. Bush was a very good man. Unfortunately, I think he'll go down in history as not a very successful president, but he was a good man, and he certainly had the right objectives. I think the power. I think one of the things that changed, in my opinion, Mark, and you're the political pro, is the party post Bush has become much more non-interventionist after the catastrophes of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that changed the party a lot. Trump, I've gotten to know pretty well. I met Trump the first time in early 2016, like January 2016, when Larry Kudlow and I had a meeting with him at Trump Tower when he was just beginning to run for president. I didn't like him very much before I walked in the room, but I have to say the guy's got a pretty charismatic presence, and we had a real meeting of the minds on a lot of issues. And so I've come to greatly admire him in a lot of ways. I don't always agree with him, but I do think I like the fact that he wants to put America first. And I really do believe that's what every president should do.
And I've never met anybody in the economic realm of the conservative movement who didn't know you and you didn't know. You've been around, and you're very sociable, and you're active, so people know you. Am I safe to say that of the two Kevins and Scott Bessent, you know all three of them?
So you mean Scott Bassett? Who else?
The two Kevins?
Oh, Kevin Warsh and Kevin Hassett.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Hassett been a friend for 20 years. I've known Kevin very well. I don't know Kevin Warsh that well. I mean, I met him a couple times, but I wouldn't say I know him that well. I mean, I think both the two Kevins are highly qualified to be the next Fed chairman. I think one of them. I think there's a good chance one of those two will be the next Fed chairman. You never know with Trump. He every time I see Trump, he says, "Steve, I should have, I never appointed." Jerome Powell, I said, yes, Mr. President, that was probably a mistake. But I don't think Trump will replace. I don't think he's going to replace Powell. I think he'll wait him out. He may name his successor sometime in the next month or two or three, just to sort of put pressure on. But I got to tell you, there's no love lost between those two right now.
Yeah.
It's like they want a divorce from each other.
Yeah, you never know with Trump, as you said, but you think that the two Kevins are the front runners and not Scott Bessent?
I'd say Scott Bessent is a third, possibility. You're right. Trump really likes Scott. Look, Scott Bessent really has emerged as one of the real superstars of this administration. He's very good at talking Trump out of his bad ideas. You're right. In my career, I've been able to be around a lot of very successful people. I'm not I'm not famous myself, but I've been able to be around a lot of these people. And one of the things when you're around really smart people, I'll give you an example like Newt Gingrich. And I think Newt was, brilliant. And he engineered that. You were there in 1993, 94, and 95 when people thought there's no way Republicans can take the House. It just seems so improbable. And Newt, I still am good friends with him to this day. He's one of those people who he'll walk into a room and he'll have 5 new ideas, and 3 of them are brilliant and 2 of them are really stupid. And our job was to say, go with ideas 1, 2, and 3, and talk him out of ideas 4. In fact, Trump is like that too. He has some brilliant ideas and he has some really bad ideas. And luckily he has Scott Bessent is the kind of guy who can say, Mr. President, do X, but don't do Y. And he can talk Trump out of his bad ideas. And look, everybody has bad ideas. And so I think he's been instrumental to Trump's success so far.
He seems to be very well regarded in Washington. He was a donor. He used to be a donor for Al Gore, not super involved in politics, and then is now in the Treasury job. And most people who come from the private sector who've gone to that job have not done well. So it's quite exceptional. Earlier today, he was criticized by his predecessor, Janet Yellen, and I don't know. Do we have this quote? He snapped back really hard. And one of the things I've learned about him since he became Treasury Secretary is if you go after Scott Bessent, he will come back at you super hard. And he went at her not only on the Biden economic record, but he went after her specifically saying she didn't have much of a China policy, He suggested she wasn't at the Treasury Department very often. He made fun of her conduct on a trip to China. If we have that, put it up. But if not, I just want to ask you. Here it is. Let's see.
No, I don't. He has succeeded in undoing everything that was a priority of mine at Treasury. This goes well beyond China. Well, listen, I mean, I think
Well, hold on. So no, that's what she said. Now here's what he said. He said, sadly, these bitter comments come as no surprise. Secretary Yellen's greatest priority when she actually visited the Treasury building was leaving me and the American people at the largest deficit to GDP in American history when our country was not at war and recession. I couldn't even tell you what Secretary Yellen's China policy was, aside from consuming beer and mushrooms. So I want to ask you in general what you think the secret to his success has been. But before I do, have you noticed what I have, which is he's a pretty, as President Bush 43 would say, he's a pretty tough hombre, or maybe Donald Trump would say that.
You're talking about Scott Bessent.
Yeah, Scott Bessent.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty big clapback. That is not turning the other cheek.
Yeah, I mean, I met Scott for the first time in early 2017 when Trump had just won this, surprise election, and he was a big money guy in finance in New York, and we had a bunch of meetings together, and he was curious about Trump at that time, and frankly, he wasn't a big fan of Trump's at that time, but we met periodically, and we would talk, and he's come around to Trump, and then we helped arrange a meeting between Trump and Scott Bessent about, I don't know, about a year ago. And the next thing I know,
when you say we, who's the we?
Just I won't mention the other names, but the people who are close to Trump. And
was that their first meeting?
I believe so.
Okay.
And I don't know for sure, but I think it probably was. And I wasn't in that particular meeting, but my point I was going to make is that they have this meeting, and the next thing I know, Scott Bessent is on the stage with Trump at these rallies. I'm like, wow, that was fast. They must have had an immediate meeting of the minds on policy. And listen, I'm friends with Scott, so I'm a little biased, but I have to say he has been a very, and I know I'm just reading some of the notes. I mean, I know a lot of people on this program are not necessarily big Donald Trump fans, but Scott has really been a very positive force for Trump. He's the one who talked Trump. Remember in mid-April when the Dow Jones was way down, the economy was crashing, and talked Trump out of some of his big tariff policies. And look at how the economy has changed from mid-April to mid-July. It's been one of the most amazing transformations. So I think I'm really happy with the job that Scott Bessent is doing. Trump loves him. Whether he would be the next speaker, next Fed chairman, I don't know. But there is some talk, Mark, you may have heard this chatter, that maybe he could do both jobs. That would be pretty tough. I mean, those are the two most important jobs in the economy. I don't know if he could be Treasury Secretary and Fed Chairman, but there is some chatter about that.
Yeah, I think the Republican Senate has shot it down as not advisable because of the independence of the Fed. Although we do have a Secretary of State who's also National Security Advisor. That's kind of fallen under the radar a bit. Those are two pretty big jobs. I want to break down his effectiveness because, again, I talked to a lot of Democrats who say he's effective. They may not agree with the policies. If you were teaching a course, and by the way, I don't recommend reading the chat. And I never read it. Don't even glance at it. Only pollute your mind. If you were teaching a course or say Columbia Business School, what are 3 or 4 or 5 things that Scott Bessent has done that has made him an effective Treasury Secretary? What would be on your list of the kind of do's as opposed to don'ts to be a good Treasury Secretary that Scott Bessent has embodied?
Boy, that's a good question. First of all, I'm just thinking off the top of my mind that, you've got a very powerful CEO in Donald Trump, who is very set in his ways. He doesn't like to be told he's wrong. He wants people to go along with his agenda. So what you have to do, what Scott's done effectively, is been able to talk Trump away, as I said earlier, away from some of his bad ideas. I don't know how he does it, but he does. And look, I've been in meetings when I could say, and I call balls and strikes with Trump. So sometimes he gets angry at me, when I don't agree with his policies. But you have to do it in a way. You have to know who the CEO is. You have to be able to make your case in a way that doesn't get you tossed out of the room. And I think Scott is, and you have to earn the trust. I think Trump trusts the judgment of Scott Bessent, because Trump is not a finance. I mean, he doesn't know Wall Street the way that Trump does. So uh, he doesn't lose his cool. I'm impressed with him for a new player. He's new to the game, but you watch him all the time. I'm quite impressed with the way he handles himself with the media. When they hit him, he doesn't lose his cool. But he strikes back in a pretty aggressive uh, and oftentimes a very compelling way.
I love your list. I'm gonna offer up two more, and you tell me what you think. And this is sometimes visible publicly, but it's mostly behind the scenes. But based on my reporting, he's a very good bureaucratic infighter, and he follows the rule: know which fights to fight, and when you choose one to fight, win. And he's been very effective. There's no secret.
That's a great point.
A lot of territorial clashes with Secretary Lutnick, who wanted the Treasury job and didn't get it, and he could spend his whole day fighting with Howard Lutnick, but he only spends some of his day doing that. So that'd be one. Picks his fights carefully and generally wins.
I totally agree.
On those internal wars. And then the other thing is, I find particularly dealing with the Hill and dealing with his counterparts overseas, not just the finance ministers, but the trade negotiators he's been dealing with, is he's very aware of where leverage is. And Donald Trump's all about leverage. And I think Scott Bessent has been too. If he goes to the Hill, he's very on point. If he's speaking with a foreign leader, very on point of saying, here's what we're going to do and why. Mr. Zelensky, we're going to get this rare earth minerals deal done, this natural resources deal done, and it's going to be on our terms, and here's why. And he goes in so prepared and so aware of where the American leverage is, or in the case of the administration in the Hill, where the executive branch leverage is. And again, my sense of those meetings is because he's so prepared and so tough and resolute, he wins more than he loses.
I think both are excellent points, especially the first one. I totally agree with. I mean, people, I wasn't sure that he could make it for 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Game of Thrones over there in the White House to some extent.
Yeah.
Especially at the beginning, and the knives were out for Bessent even before he was nominated. And so he's handled that in a very strategic way, and that's a big key to his success.
Yeah, I'll tell you two others that are related. And again, this is all for my book, so nobody steal it. He learned early that with Trump, influence is predicated on proximity more than anything else. If you're in the room with Trump, so I think he got the Treasury job in large part, not because he's not qualified, over Lutnick, because he basically moved down to Palm Beach and spent a lot of time around Trump during the transition. And of course, Trump likes his thing about central casting. He thinks Scott looks like a Treasury Secretary, but really being present with Trump, and of course, he's got a little bit of a geographical advantage because, as you know, and many people on here know, the Treasury building is practically on the White House grounds. It's right across the street, so he's there a lot. And then second, an alliance with Susie Wiles. Anyone in this administration who wants to succeed, you'd be a moron not to develop an alliance with Susie Wiles. And I know, again, it's all for my book, don't steal it. I know who, I'm not talking to you, Steve, I'm talking to the people lurking on here. I know who the people, if you name anybody in the administration, how they get along with Susie Wiles, I can tell you, fan favorite, tolerant, don't like. The people who are generally wielding power in this administration, Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, Scott Bessent, they get along very well with Susie Wiles. And I don't know how well he knew her before 2 years ago, but he's got allies. And so, for instance, on the Fed choice, I'm told it's basically the two of them making this decision, along with the president and the vice president, of course. But that's, I think, also served him well. He knows when to be in the Oval and knows to make nice with the very powerful chief of staff.
Well, both points are excellent points. I could not agree more. With Trump, virtually every major decision is made in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
And so if you're back over in the Department of Education or the Department of Interior, you might as well be in Siberia,
Yeah.
right?
That's right.
Every decision is made by Trump in the White House in these meetings. And when you go over there, and I've only been there once or twice so far this year, they're all hanging out there.
Yeah. Yes.
They're not back in their office. They're
Yeah.
all hanging out, hoping to be called in.
Yeah.
And I think Scott got that instantly. And you're right, he played his cards so well. Remember, again, a year ago, Donald Trump didn't even know Scott Bessent was, and
Yeah.
now he's, his closest confidant. And
Yeah.
I agree with you, Susie Wiles. I have nothing but admiration for Susie, and I have a good relationship with Susie, and she has been a fantastic. It's not an easy job being Donald Trump's chief of staff. It's probably the hardest job. The guy. It's not a. It is true that Trump only sleeps 5 hours a night, so he's calling people at 5 in the morning and at midnight, and so it is I've talked to some of the former chiefs of staff, and they just burn out. They burn out in that job. And Susie she ran a great campaign. You're the political guy, but I think the campaign was incredibly well run, and she's been a great, and Trump really relies on her. So you want to go through the gateway to get to Trump, you go through Susie.
Yep. All right. 2 more questions for me, at least as of now, for Steve Moore, and then your question. So please raise your hand. And again, I'd love if you keep them for our guest, who is not here to talk about. Let's try to talk about the economy tonight. That's all I'll say. Tariffs. You're not a tariff guy. You're a free trader, like most people traditionally in the party. And you and I spent weeks reading tweets from and getting texts and emails from our friends in the Kudlow Romney wing of the party, saying this guy's destroying the economy. This is Scott Bessent was supposed to be some genius. Is the biggest own goal in the history of the republic, and there's going to be no toys at Christmas, and there's going to be no supply chain, and it's all going to be a disaster. How would you appraise where we are now regarding people's concerns about the tariff policy destroying the American economy?
Well, I'm a free trade guy, and I don't like tariffs. And Trump gets angry at me sometimes about not liking his tariffs. But Trump is a strategic guy. He is a very shrewd negotiator. I think everybody realizes that. He really does understand the art of the deal. It's become a cliche, but it really is true. I've seen him up front as a master negotiator. And you use the word leverage, and that really is what the whole book is about. If you have leverage, if you and I, Mark, are negotiating something, and I have leverage over you, I'm probably going to win that negotiation. And if you have leverage over me, you're probably going to win it. So he uses, and this is something, it seems obvious now as we kind of look back that when we're negotiating with these other countries, every country in the world needs to trade with the United States. They just need to. We have a comparative advantage in trade because we're the hub of the world trading system, and every other country is a spoke. And he's the first president who said, we're going to use that leverage to force countries to do things that are America's interests. Now, that's a very risky strategy. Sometimes it works, sometimes. So far, it's worked out pretty well. But it keeps me up at night because this could derail. And the global trade is what's really, I mentioned that big boom in the economy of the last 40 years. Trade is one of the biggest reasons for that. So I think, look, I'm more confident now than ever that he's going to get some deals. Just an hour ago, I got an email just that, looks like the Europeans are making some concessions in some of the negotiations that are going on. So, and they have to. It's for us to trade with Europe, we obviously benefit from trade, but a lot of these countries like Canada, the Europeans, they have to trade with the United States. We're a $20 trillion consumer market. So we're using that leverage to try to get countries to do things that are in America's interest. I'm a little disturbed by the fact, Mark, that he has so aggressively gone after some of our allies. Trump isn't liked very well in Canada right now, we obviously need to trade with Mexico because Mexico. The last thing we want, we keep Mexico's economy running. We don't want to make sure we want to make sure it doesn't go south on us. So
A good pun,
I
by the
think
way.
overall I underestimated how well this could work, but I think it's still the jury is still out.
Okay, jury is still, but you like me are less often hearing from people saying this is the biggest blunder in economic policy history, right? People are still concerned, but people, at least in my world, they've stopped saying that.
Well, I mean, Mark, look at the market. You know, we just hit
Yeah,
all-time highs on the
yeah,
S&P and the Dow today. I mean, the market is a pretty good voting mechanism. Now, back, remember in April, I was standing on the ledge, ready to jump off. Remember, we'd lost 2,000 points, 2,500 points, 3,000 points on the Dow. It was just ugly. Liberation Day was one of the worst days of my life. Remember Liberation Day? That was just,
yeah.
I was like, I couldn't believe this is the new Republican Party, but things have so far turned out pretty well.
Okay. Lastly, the vice president. Um, I talked about this sometimes. Bill Clinton was part of what the liberal journalist Sidney Blumenthal used to call the conversation. And in both parties, it's roughly the same. It's governors and think tankers and academics and writers and current and former elected officials who have a rolling conversation, whether it's at at an AI conference or a governor's meeting or at a dinner in Washington, where you're talking about policy, serious policy conversations, generating ideas that a president could take to the Oval Office and really try to change the country, whether it's on the left or the right or in the center. One of my theories about why the vice president is assumed more power, I think, than even Dick Cheney just a few months in here, is because he's part of the conservative conversation. That he could sit with you or Newt or Tom Cotton or the brightest lights in AEI or anywhere and Hoover, and he could be at the table and he could have a serious conversation. What do you think?
I'm sorry, who are you talking about?
Sorry, Vice President Vance.
Oh, Vance. Okay, yeah.
So I'm wondering what do you think of that theory, both in terms of my belief that he's part of the conversation when he was in the private sector and now, and to the extent you agree with that, to the extent you believe that accounts for, to some extent, his accumulation of influence.
Again, you're talking about JD.
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. First of all, I have to say I don't know JD that well. I knew him a little bit when he was in the Senate. I'd met him a few times. I wouldn't say, I run in his circles. So I don't have a close relationship with him because I just don't know him very well. I do think that it's a hard job being Donald Trump's vice president. And he obviously is the heir apparent to the Republican nomination, but it's not assured. And I do believe for those who are watching and listening to this because you're interested in politics, I worried, what happens post-Trump to the Republican Party. Trump has about 2 years left of being, the big force, and then we all start really focusing on 2028. And JD has to be very careful that he doesn't race out of the gate, before Trump wants him to, because Trump has to be the center of attention all of the time. And he can't win without Trump's support. So that's a tricky situation for JD. But the other thing is, like, JD is what we're calling the new term is national conservative, and this is a big fight that's coming within the Republican Party between the more traditional. I'm a more traditional libertarian, free market Reagan guy, and this national conservative movement is people like Marco Rubio and people like JD Vance and people like that Missouri senator, blanking out on his name. You know what I'm talking about.
That young whippersnapper.
Yeah,
Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley.
Josh Hawley.
Yeah. So, and they're gaining some influence. And Trump, I've always said Trump is sort of in the middle of these two camps. He has one foot in the kind of, and so there's going to be a big fight within the Republican Party in the next couple of years about whether the party is going to be kind of a party of Reagan or a party of the kind of extreme MAGA right wing. And and JD really is one of the leaders of that other school of thinking. There tend to be anti-immigration, they tend to be anti-trade, they tend to be pro-union, they tend to be in favor of more like antitrust, et cetera, more pro-regulation. And so that fight is coming within the party. So if you all think everything's,
Yeah.
fine and dandy in the Republican Party, it is now because Trump is such a commanding figure, but I don't know how much longer that will last.
The people you know who know JD Vance well like him a lot?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not too close to his
Yeah.
people, so I don't know what he's like, on a casual,
Yeah.
situation. I just haven't been in that situation with him.
All right.
It's funny because I do know a lot of these
Yeah.
players, and JD, I probably know
Yeah. Maybe the three of us will go to dinner soon. How about that? Raleigh,
Yeah.
welcome in. Thank you for joining. Question for Mr. Moore.
Yes. So Mr. Moore, I heard you talking about the tariffs, and last month we ran a budget surplus for the first time in like a while for that month, and a lot of that is
Yeah.
attributed to the tariffs. Do you think that do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Because it sounded like it sounded like earlier you were kind of neutral on the tariffs.
Well, look, tariffs are taxes, right? Tariff is a tax. So what's one thing, just as an aside, I'm a strict constitutionalist. I have a big problem with Congress allowing the president to raise taxes unilaterally. I don't think the president should have the power to just unilaterally raise tariffs. The Constitution is pretty clear on this. Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that taxes start in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really fault Congress on is just deferring all this power, conferring all this power on the president. I don't think it's a healthy thing. I mean, I always tell my friends, imagine that Kamala Harris had won the election and she said, "Oh, we've got a climate change crisis, so we're going to raise tariffs on all this stuff." I mean, people on the right would be going crazy. Yet Trump is doing that, and there's not really a people protest. I mean, some people do, but I don't think it's healthy for our constitutional system. So a tariff is a tax. And if you have a tax, you want to raise revenue from it. So if we're raising revenue from the tariffs, that's a good thing. It reduces our deficit and so on. I wouldn't exaggerate. I think Trump exaggerates how much revenue is going to come in from tariffs. But look, every bit counts. I forget the number, but you're quite right that we did run a slight surplus last month, and tariffs were up, but also income tax and payroll taxes were up because more people are working, and so that's a good sign.
Raleigh, thank you. Great
Incidentally,
question.
I should mention because some of these questions, we have a little newsletter we put out and that is free. If anybody wants to get it, just go to unleashprosperity.com. And it's just a 5 or 6 bullet points every morning on the economy. I mean, it's from a right of center perspective, but it goes out to about 100,000 people every day. It's free. So if you want it, and if you don't like it, you can just unsubscribe. But it's called Unleash Prosperity Hotline. And you just go to unleashprosperity.com.
I recommend it to you. I read it every day. And Steve talked about what's in it. He left out that there are good jokes in there. There's a lot of good jokes, good cartoons, good jokes. Alan, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, your question for Steve Moore.
I'm in Tallahassee, Florida. And my question for Steve was, I was talking to actually a businessman from Malaysia, and he sort of explained how the businesses are probably going to eat the tariffs because that's a cost of doing business. They're not going to not come to our market. That's Trump's leverage. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on his theory that he was talking to me about.
It's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to it. A lot of economists have been all over the place on that issue about who bears the burden of a tariff. So I guess I'm just going to kind of punt on this and say some of the cost of the tariffs will be borne by the businesses. So for example, if we put a tariff on the French wine, for example, that the French wine companies will have to, lower their profit margins. But I do think some of that tax eventually gets passed on to the consumer. And so I think, what ratio that is, I don't really know, but I'm uncomfortable with this argument that tariffs won't cause higher inflation. I think they will cause higher prices in some of those products where the tariffs apply.
Okay. I was just curious because his argument made a lot of sense, and it sort of made me think about like a Sam's
Yeah, but
Club.
remember, sorry to interrupt, but remember, I mean, a company has to make a profit. If they can't make a
Yeah.
profit, they're out of business. So if the tariff is so high that it just erodes their profit margin, then they're either going to have to raise their prices or they're going to have to go out of business. And so, that's why we have seen a lot of companies that I talk to, that are importing stuff. And, look, we don't just import like wine and things. We import a lot of steel, plastic, copper, auto parts and so on. And those I don't think Trump fully appreciates that. That's when you raise those prices, you're raising the price of, like, oh, let me give you a simple example. I'm totally opposed to steel tariffs. I think those are the protectionist tariffs are the worst kind of tariffs, because steel is obviously embedded in everything that, not everything, but most of the things that are produced, especially manufacturing, construction. So if you raise the steel price in the United States, you're going to make building a home more expensive. You're going to make building a car more expensive. You're going to make, and that puts our other companies at disadvantage. That's why, Mark, we found, based on a review of the literature, that steel tariffs actually lose jobs in manufacturing. Now, that may seem counterintuitive, but yeah, you gain some jobs in the steel industry, but you lose jobs in other industries that use steel because it's more expensive, and that puts our other products at a competitive disadvantage.
Alan, thank you. Grateful to you. Garrity, welcome in.
Thank you. You got my name right.
Thank you
I am
for
a
joining.
Garrity.
Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's in your mind for Steve Moore.
I'm in Colorado. And what's in my mind, so by the way, my training in economics is via a master's degree from UC Berkeley. So you might read a little bit liberal in there, but I'm actually very conservative.
By the way, if I could just interrupt you for a second, for about 5 years, I used to do a weekly TV show with what's his name, Robert Reich from Berkeley, and he and I became pretty good friends over. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but at one point he brought me out to Berkeley and we did a debate there. But it's a great school.
Yes, I was. Yes. Anyway, he'll remember me.
Is he still teaching? Is he still teaching there?
I think he's like, I think he might be ad hoc, or I don't think he's still full time. I don't think he's emeritus status, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
I can follow it up. Anyway, so I guess when I was listening, I was hearing your total perspective being only on the results of the stock market in the last 40 years. And that was very unsettling for me. In part just because you have to ask, the stock market has benefited who and how and what, but it is also so overly leveraged right now. And I found you uncomfortably dismissive about debt and deficit.
I think your first point was right, but Steve, you're not cavalier about debt and deficit, right?
Well, that's what I heard in his
go
words.
ahead, finish your point, because I want to hear you out. So,
go ahead.
Okay, that's literally what I heard in the words. You're like, I'm kind of worried about it. I'm really worried about it. But anyway, so I just, those two things, I don't want those things to be literally the conservative place in economics. I find it really worrying.
Great point.
So,
great point.
So let me just quickly address both those issues. So I was kind of using the stock market as a proxy, and you're right. I mean, look, it's not a perfect proxy at all. We care about what happens with people's income. The stock market's a proxy for what's happening with wealth, but we also care a lot about what's happening with people's incomes. And the evidence it's pretty clear that over the last, if you look at sort of the census data on median family income over the last 40 years, that's up about 40%. That's a pretty big number. And by the way, the biggest gain was under Clinton. So I'm not making a political point. I'm just saying, I'm just giving you the facts. And so, so I do believe that the average incidentally, Mark, when I talked about that faction of the Republican Party, this national conservatism, it's interesting because their whole line is the middle class is disappearing and it's shrinking, and and it's not, it just isn't true. The middle, to the extent the middle class is shrinking, people are getting richer, not poorer. And look, I'm not saying everybody's doing better, but most people are. So that was my point. And incidentally, one of my missions in life is to try to get everybody into the stock market so that, you know, rising tide really does lift all boats. And so I think more and more that we can get people invested, because you can't, the way to get rich is to take ownership and to put your money into the market, because you know, you get a good nice return over time in the stock market. And then, you know, the debt and deficit issue, I what I tell the Republicans is focus on economic growth. Focus on the things that will make the economy more prosperous, because when the economy becomes more prosperous, you get more people working, you get businesses making more money, you get more tax revenues in, and you know, in other words, what we should care about is the debt, which you're right is scarily high, but we want to grow the denominator, which is the GDP, and my goal is to make sure that the economy grows faster than the debt. And you know, in the last few years, that has not been the case.
Well, that's the last few years. I feel like when is everybody going to stop diluting themselves on that? I mean, of course, it's the federal government is obligated to do a certain amount of deficit spending because they can, because sometimes they need to. But for this long, at rates this high, I'm not bullish. I'm not bullish.
I'm with you. You know, I think it's way too high and it's dangerous. And, you know, there could be a day of reckoning. I hope I'm wrong, but it could come. And, you know, when these things come, I mean, you know, Mark, you and I've lived through these things, but, you know, they come like a tidal wave. And, you know, remember what happened in you know, 2000 and 2008. I remember so vividly. What 1 week all these banks are in business, and the next week they're obliterated. You know, so these things can come in so quickly.
But that wasn't because of debt and deficit.
No, I know, but I'm just saying. But
yeah, well,
but you know,
that was a whole other level of irresponsibility.
I'm for fiscal responsibility and robust economic growth, but I've been told my whole career that debt and deficit are going to ruin the American economy, and it hadn't happened yet. I'm not saying it can't, but it hadn't happened yet.
What does yet mean, Mark? What does yet mean? I'm not even sure we can say yet.
It means over the course of my career, I've been told China will stop lending us money, and there'll be cataclysmic impact on debt and deficit. And there hasn't been. Again, I'm for fiscal discipline. I could balance the budget in 5 years if they put me in charge, but so far they haven't asked.
And by the way, one of the reasons I mentioned the stock market is because, you know, when you're looking at the debt, you have to look at the debt, which is gigantic, no question, $37 trillion. It's a pretty frightening number. By the way, Mark, you know, you asked me when I first came to Washington, 1984. Back then, the debt was $1 trillion. Now it's $37 trillion. So that's a huge increase. But that's why I mentioned that you have to look at the debt relative to the assets. So yes, the debt's gone up by $37 trillion, but the wealth of the country has gone up by $150 trillion or something like that.
And that's where I would get back to the other point that I had, that our stock market is so over leveraged right now. It's so over leveraged.
Are you selling? Are you shorting the market?
I'm holding, in all honesty, but I've told my children to go a little bit European.
Yeah. Thank you. Great questions. Very grateful to you for being part of Two Way. Thank you. Steve, if you were starting the Conservative Economists Hall of Fame, and you were on the selection committee for the first 3 inductees, and we'd say you're not eligible the first year, who would be in the Conservative Economists Hall of Fame? They have to be living. Who would you induct?
Living. Oh gosh, that's a lot harder, because I was going to say, obviously, well, by the way, one of my mentors, the guy who really got me involved in politics, was a guy named Julian Simon. I met at the University of Illinois when I was 19 years old, and he changed my life. He was the one who proved that the world wasn't coming to an end, and the world wasn't overpopulated, and that we weren't running out of oil and energy and food and all of those things. Remember Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb and all that?
Yep.
He was the doomslayer, but he died 20 years ago. So look, I mean, Arthur Laffer is one of my mentors, and it's scandalous that he has not won a Nobel Prize, because he has had an enormous influence on policy all over the world. I'm a big fan of Larry Kudlow, and I like I'm trying to think who are some of the other great economists out there. Well, Tom Sowell,
Yeah.
at Hoover Institute.
Yeah.
I think he's still alive. I think he's like
I think he is.
94. And
I think he is. That's a good,
great economist.
That's a
So
good list. If I can raise the money for the hall, we'll open it up and we'll make those our first inductees. Steve, couldn't be more grateful to you for coming on and sharing all your wisdom and expertise and experience.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. It was great being on that panel with you a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I enjoyed
See
it.
you later.
Hope you'll come back. Thank you. All right. Thank you all for being part of Two Way, and whether you watch just tonight or more than one this week, grateful to you. We'll be back next week with a whole new slate. If you haven't yet listened to my latest episode of Next Up with my long conversation with Megyn Kelly about the Epstein matter, I recommend it to you. Available now on YouTube and where you get your podcasts. And of course, you can still go back and watch all the many Two Ways that occurred this week. And I'll see you, barring breaking news, 9 a.m. Monday morning Eastern time with Sean and Dan for the morning meeting. Thank you for watching. Have a good night, a great weekend.